Dr. Claude Anderson has long talked about inappropriate behavior in the black community. And what that means is black people who just go overboard doing things that are against the interests of the group. Now, the people who act like this, they do it for quickie attention at best and to try to get themselves some cash by selling black people out at the worst. In either case, inappropriate behavior is never done for anyone's good, except for the fool doing it, even though it doesn't help them very much or for very long. Recently, one of George Floyd's sisters has decided to speak out on the conviction of the murderer Derek Chauvin. And I gotta say from the start, George Floyd's family has been occasionally problematic on this issue. His brother was near incoherent when he talked about what he wanted, though one of Floyd's sisters sounded not much better than his brother, saying vague, almost meaningless phrases like, apply more pressure on these guys and firing them is not enough. My problem with that is they never say what should be done. Simply saying justice and firing isn't enough doesn't tell people what someone wants. You have to wonder if that's what Ben Crump told them to say, with the promise that the city would be more willing to negotiate a settlement if you don't pressure them too hard or make any concrete demands. The simplest and most basic word to say when a crime has been committed is prison. But the way that these people assiduously stayed away from that word, not just his brother, but pretty much the whole family, makes me think someone was advising them not to use that word. People need to understand this is why, as the black media, we hang back to see what the family does whenever a black person's been harmed and everybody's getting themselves worked up into a righteous anger. We sit back and say, wait a minute, let's see what the family does. Because this has happened way too many times. We allow ourselves to be put into a position where we're basically acting as the cheerleading squad for them. Meanwhile, they're turning around trying to figure out how to play a finesse. Why would anybody whose family member was basically tortured to death publicly and the murderer who did it claimed that he didn't do anything wrong, why would that person be running in front of the white media and saying, oh, let me go ahead and tell you that I forgive this person? Why do that? Especially when you would think that this issue was beginning to recede into the background. It wasn't exactly a hot front page topic, but here she is making it one for the wrong reasons. Why would somebody feel compelled to do that? It reminds me of that black man in New York who said that he forgave the racist Amy Cooper for falsely calling the police on him. You know, there's a number of black people who just have this kinky need to try to publicly show the white supremacists that they're willing to die just to be one of their pals. I'm also reminded of the sickening spectacle put on in open court by the family of Botham Jean, hugging the murderer of his own brother. It doesn't get much lower than that. This is bootlicking as performance art. It's not meant to be true forgiveness or true anything, because, as in the case of George Floyd, the murderer, Derek Chauvin, hasn't even admitted that he did anything wrong, and he's never asked for forgiveness. Floyd's sister had no choice but to admit to that one. You know, even God doesn't forgive without the sinner asking for forgiveness. To forgive without the sinner admitting that they sinned is for you to become an accomplice to the sin itself. You're giving someone a license to keep on sinning. So for those of you hardheads out there who keep asking why we in the black media don't immediately jump to the rescue whenever a black person is harmed by some white supremacist, this is the reason why. Because in too many cases, the families of the deceased fight against our efforts. And it's not because they don't know any better. It's because their agenda, in too many cases, is not the same as ours. It's bad enough you have people talking that I don't think it was racial stuff before a trial even takes place, but now we have people trying to help get these murderers off the hook after they've been put away. There is nothing noble about doing that. It's not noble at all. It's stupid. And the people who do it are only doing it in the hopes of pleasing a non-black audience. That's who they want to reach. But what we're seeing is the white media trying to slither back to the old status quo. And they're doing it by giving a huge platform to any black person who's willing to speak against our interests. I've always told you that sports reporting is where the white supremacists go so they can spout their anti-black racism unvarnished under the guise that, oh, we're just talking about a particular athlete or about a particular team or, just sports culture in general. And then what they do is they attack black athletes as proxies for the black community. That's why sports reporters are given so much play. Because sports reporting is almost entirely editorial, and they make it very clear that the only time they'll talk about an athlete being in some kind of trouble is if they're black. Either they try to drop racial code words and say that so-and-so has natural talent, which is the same as saying that this person didn't actually work to develop any skills, Or they'll say that this person is basically some sort of thug, but they'll use another word for that. Or they'll say this person lacks class. That's the main word that they use whenever talking about black athletes. Well, they just don't have class, meaning that they don't have whiteness. And then they also attack them for not being grateful, which means that they don't bow and scrape and kiss some crusty racist behind like Glen Kuiper. Glen Kuiper got himself fired, though it took weeks for the white media to see if the heat was going to die down, and when it didn't, they had no choice but to go ahead and dump him overboard. Expect him to get picked up by Fox News or something. This clown has been in the white media too long, and he thought that he would pull a fast one and use the word nigger on air when talking about the Negro Baseball League Museum. Cue the angry white reporters who pretend as if using racial slurs is some sort of inevitability that everybody does, when in reality, if you're supposed to be a professional sports commentator, then it's not too much to expect you not to use racial slurs.
Question: should a sports announcer's mistaken use of the N-word cost him his job? A longtime baseball announcer for the Oakland A's was let go after he used the N-word on air, which he says was unintentional. During a pregame show in Kansas City, Glen Kuiper, longtime baseball announcer for the Oakland A's, was talking to colleague Dallas Braden about their trip to the Negro League's Baseball Museum, which is in that city. But Kuiper mispronounced the word Negro and instead used the slur.
We had a phenomenal day today. League Museum and Arthur Bryant's Barbecue.
He was then suspended by NBC Sports California and ultimately fired. The network said in a statement, quote, following an internal review, the decision has been made for NBC Sports California to end its relationship with Glen Kuiper effective immediately. A person familiar with the investigation told the Associated Press that the decision was based on a, quote, variety of factors, including information uncovered in that internal review. We invited Glen Kuiper to come on this program today, but he declined our offer. In a written statement, he called the slur an unfortunate mispronunciation. On that day, I chose to spend my personal time by educating myself and learning more about MLB's history by going to the Negro League Museum. He added, please know that racism is in no way a part of me. It never has been. It never will be. I wish the Oakland A's and NBC Sports would have taken into consideration my 20-year career, my solid reputation, integrity, and character. But in this current environment, traits like integrity and character are no longer considered. Then the president of the museum, Bob Kendrick, created a bit of a ruckus when he tweeted out a statement saying, my heart is one of forgiveness, and that he hoped others would find it in themselves to do the same. I recently spoke with Bob Kendrick to ask him about that. What do you make of critics who say the word was just too accessible, too much on the tip of his tongue?
I understand what they're saying. And yes, it does sometimes maybe make one believe that is a word that maybe have been used before. I don't know for certain. So I understand that point of view. But again, that doesn't mean that it was deliberate. It doesn't mean that in this case, I felt that there was malicious intent. It was an awful thing to say. We acknowledge it as such. We don't condone what the use of the word was, but I certainly believe that it was a mistake. And I've been criticized because I felt like it was a mistake.
I was going to ask about exactly that. What has been the reaction to your forgiveness?
Well, number one would never think so much hate would come along with forgiveness. That, again, as I've said before, that seems a little bit counterintuitive, but I understand to some degree the emotional anguish that something like this can generate. It's a horrible slur to have happened. So I understand that. Now, was I surprised by how much vitriol had come my way? Absolutely. But again, that is the nature, particularly of social media.
I hope the silver lining is a boost in your attendance. Candidly, I didn't know the museum was in Kansas City. I'm not going to come back to Kansas City without stopping in for a visit, and I hope that others do likewise.
Well, I hope so too, because Michael, we had just announced our plans to build a brand new 30,000 square foot standalone Negro Leagues Baseball Museum just a few days before this happened. So I was riding a tremendous high, man. You know, this notion of building a new museum, even though it's going to cost us about $25 million to build it. And I've gotten a lot of congratulations on having to raise $25 million in order to do this. But I understand people were excited and we were excited. And then this happens and you find yourself kind of embroiled in something that was really not your own doing. But again, it comes with the territory.
So the only thing this old crusty bootlick wanted was to go ahead and get rid of this. Well, we talking about trying to expand this thing at 30,000 feet, and it's taking attention away from the museum, and I was riding a tremendous high, and we just need to go ahead and get on past this. So to him, this is a PR issue. You see that his interests, such as they are directly aligned with white supremacy's interests. They're aligned with the racist Kuiper's interests, not with the black communities. So now we see why he's saying forgive. Yeah, well, we need to get on past this and get me some more money for this. We need to get on past this. Let's move on now. Don't want to make a big deal out of it now. There are few things as pathetic as an old, dried-up, useless Negro who's just trying to work a finesse. There's few things as pathetic as that. We have the likes of right-wing apologists for white supremacy, CNN, telling us that it shouldn't have cost this racist his job. This scumbag Smirkanish actually said that this racist mispronounced the word Negro. Even ZZ Top, who was sitting next to him, could tell what happened. They waited a couple of weeks to can him, and even Smirkanish had to admit that Kuiper's now former employers said they also found other things that contributed to his being thrown out with the trash.
A person familiar with the investigation told the Associated Press that the decision was based on a, quote, variety of factors, including information uncovered in that internal review.
But of course, Smirkanish didn't have much to say about that. He's not pushing for details on that one. It would go against their narrative. And by the way, I love this racist puke's attempt to play the victim by claiming that his reputation was solid, solidly racist. And also talking about character and integrity no longer matter in the current environment. Notice this moron didn't say a word about competence. While he was busy trying to throw a pity party for himself, he didn't say a word about competence matters. Because if you've been doing something professionally for 20 years, then the least your employer and the customers have a right to expect from you is that you know how to speak. Even if you're craven and degenerate enough to go along with this Kuiper clown's lie, you still have to admit that nobody else seems to have the kind of problems he's had. In fact, we need to ask the question, why is it that we pretty much see exclusively white anchor people who just seem to have the slip of the tongue where the N-word is concerned? Why is it that they're the only ones who seem to have that problem? If it's just an issue of a slip of the tongue, then shouldn't everybody have the same problem, except they don't? How many times have you heard of a black sportscaster using a racial slur against white people? Or using an anti-Semitic slur? There's a lot of black sportscasters. And not one of them has ever done that. In fact, what black coaches have you heard of who ever used some racial slur against white people? All the decades that there have been black people behind the microphones or in managerial positions in sports, and they have managed to never use racial slurs at all. So clearly the problem isn't a slip of the tongue. But of course, this is CNN, and as part of their hard pivot to the Fox News right, they had some bootlicking old Negro on who's supposed to be the president of the Negro League's baseball museum, and that this guy was running interference for this Kuiper creep. That is a disgrace. This moron was doing the most to show what a good little shameless suck-up he is, on air saying that everyone just needs to forgive this racist fool. He was speaking as if he was a white sports writer or a white executive at CNN. He didn't actually speak about this white elephant in the room, instead he glossed it over. CNN's not trying to convince anyone. What they're trying to do is to rebrand themselves as being a full-time safe space for anti-black racism. They're auditioning to be the new media comfort food for all these white supremacists. That's what this is really about. So this Kendrick clown puts on his tap dance shoes, and he's putting on a show, and we all know who he's auditioning for. He makes himself look like the turncoat bootleg he is when in his Twitter post he wrote, "I don't know what's in his heart," and then in the very same sentence he says, "I forgive him." This guy literally said he doesn't know whether Kuiper is a good person or a bad one, but he's going to do what should only be done for a good person. He was so busy trying to be the first Negro to get a pat on the head for forgiving this racist creep that he didn't bother to see if his empty gesture even made sense. This is not a matter of giving someone the benefit of the doubt, because there's no doubt what happened here. And after 20 years, you don't get to act like you slipped up one day. It's obvious what happened. Glen Kuiper's been a lifelong racist. He went to the Negro Baseball League museum, probably because his employer told him to. And so he decided that he was going to show exactly what he thought of black baseball players and black people in general. That's what happened here. And this Kendrick clown, he's clearly in the business of being accepted by racists like Glen Kuiper, because that's who he has to keep asking for money from. After everything racists like Kuiper did against the Negro Baseball League when it existed, to have trash like him still attacking them in 2023 is an unforgivable insult. And to the so-called president of the Negro Baseball Museum leading the charge to defend a racist like this, it just goes to show white power put this punk where he is. And he has as much contempt for black society as that racist Kuiper does. Kyrie Irving posted a harmless link to a harmless documentary, and they tried to run him out of the NBA. He didn't say a single word about anybody, but merely his choice of viewing material made it where he lost endorsements and had racists like Ari Emanuel trying to use a phony outrage campaign to demonize the entire black community by proxy. Gee, was Mike Smerconish telling the Ari Emanuels and the other merchants of phony racial outrage to forgive Kyrie Irving? No. And the main reason was because Kyrie Irving hadn't said a word to anyone or about anyone. And the link he posted wasn't harmful to anyone. It was a complete nothing burger. What was Kyrie Irving going to say? I'm sorry for having an Amazon account? While that is regrettable in and of itself, it's not harmful. But we had weeks where Kyrie Irving was defamed, demonized, lied about nonstop. And Mike Smerconish and CNN were saying nothing on his behalf. Bob Kendrick was nowhere to be seen either. Nobody was saying that there are Jews who said the same things as what the documentary Kyrie Irving linked to. Nobody was saying, oh, well, we need to have a full conversation about this. There was no defense of Kyrie Irving at all. Where was Bill Maher at while all this was going on? Was he defending Kyrie Irving at all on the grounds of free speech? Or that, oh, this is just cancel culture gone wild? Was Bill Maher saying that a documentary is not the Holocaust? Did Bill Maher dismiss the accusations against Kyrie Irving as just idiotic oversensitivity? Did he lambaste Ari Emanuel or anyone else and say, you guys are getting worked up about an athlete who didn't even say anything? What did Bill Maher say? Nothing. Because everyone else is entitled to respect, except black people. So this forgiveness crap only goes in one direction, and that's not forgiveness. That's just telling black people to let everyone insult us and harm us and then don't say anything about it. For the sniveling morons who want to tell us that racists just need sensitivity training and that they need to go and visit some civil rights museums, we hear that from time to time with these racist police who murder black people. Well, this punk Kuiper literally walked right out of a black baseball museum and then promptly went on air and began spouting racial slurs. As we, the black media, have always told you, an anti-black racist cannot be redeemed or changed or reformed or rehabilitated. They can only be punished. And it is not some victimless crime whenever a black person decides, well, I'm going to try to get me some quickie white media attention by saying I forgive some white supremacist. Because statements like that are exactly what the white media runs with. And they do it in order to push propaganda to white society that black people don't really mind being attacked or dehumanized or even murdered. Why, look at this crusty old Negro over here. Look at what George Floyd's relatives, look what they're saying. They don't have a problem with it, so black people don't really mind. And of course, nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. So when you don't check anti-black racism, it escalates. Hate speech always leads to hate crimes. These white supremacists are constantly looking for a place where they can say some racist stuff, then lie and claim it wasn't racist at all. And then they murder a black person, as what happened with George Floyd. And we have the murderer Derek Chauvin claiming he wasn't a racist. They say it no matter what. That's just their reflex. Because they know the white media is going to take their part, and they figure, well, we can get enough white supremacists on code, we can get our necks out of the noose. And we better understand that when the white media is giving airtime to some brain-dead Negro so they can say forgive, 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 that's because it's meant to paint a target on black people's backs. Tell me something. When has any white supremacist actually admitted they were a racist? The murderers of Ahmaud Arbery were stomped down white supremacists. They were literally calling Ahmaud Arbery a nigger after they murdered him, standing over his corpse, spouting the N-word at him. Even the racist police out there had to admit to that one. And yet, what did those racist inbred degenerates say when they were in court? They all said they weren't racist. And I'm sure somewhere Mike Smerconish was saying, well, we don't know what's in their hearts. Well, we're not going to dignify that lie. The Bob Kendricks and other assorted bootlicks can play this stupid game of acting like they can't be sure whether a blatant racist is a blatant racist. But the rest of us aren't playing along. The best yardstick by which to judge whether someone is a good or bad person is by observing their behavior. The problem isn't that Bob Kendrick doesn't know what's in Glen Kuiper's heart. The problem is Bob Kendrick cannot say that without jeopardizing the money that he hopes to get from the white donors he wants to get closer to. No matter what CNN or any other white media toilet tries to claim, Glen Kuiper is not a victim. He's a racist. End of. And Bob Kendrick's no victim either, no matter what Mike Smirkanish tries to imply. Kendrick is a bootlicking, buck-dancing, butt-kissing fool. And where I'm from, an apologist for anti-black racism doesn't get forgiveness either. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Derek, Dondi Waddell, G. Mars, Michael Rubin, and Romy. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.